Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our next segment now will widen our lens to Europe, a region that remains an important partner in supporting global cooperation and encouraging stronger Africa-Gulf collaboration from development frameworks to investment and connectivity. We are honored now to hear from a former finance minister and a vice prime minister of Finland, a former European Commissioner for International Partnerships, and the current chair of UNESCO's Global Education Monitoring Report Advisory Board. Please join me in welcoming on stage Mrs. Jutta Urpilainen for her keynote. Let's give her a round of applause. Hi, welcome. Very nice to meet you.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak at this very important event about the cooperation between Africa and the Gulf region, and also what role the European Union could play in promoting cooperation. But I thought that I would first say a few words about myself. So I have served as Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of Finland, and for 5 years as the European Union Commissioner for International Partnerships. And in this role, I was involved in preparing both the EU Gulf strategy and the EU-Africa strategy for the EU, and I was also responsible for preparing the EU's new investment initiative, the Global Gateway Strategy. And now I have been living in Qatar for the last 3 months. So perhaps this is a primer for what I want to talk to you about today, and that is opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa, if anything, is the continent of the future. 1.3 billion people, over 65% of whom are young people. And when I traveled around Africa as a commissioner, I always, in each and every of my mission, I always wanted to meet not only political decision makers, but also young people, business and NGO representatives. And I often countered the best energy, enthusiasm and drive among young people, often still young entrepreneurs. For them, only the sky was the limit. And this is why we also need to support SMEs in Africa and provide opportunities to access the finance. But the question is, what unites Africa, Europe, and the Gulf region? The first is a rule-based world order. Both here in the Gulf region, in Europe, and in Africa, there is a belief in the power of international cooperation, a rule-based world order, and multilateralism. To desire to build on multilateral cooperation, where even the voice of a small country is heard and which is not dominated by great powers. There is another unifying factor to this, and that is the commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or Agenda 2030, are the guidelines to which we as international community are committed. Unfortunately, it is currently somewhat sidelined in the political debate because of the public debate is currently dominated, at least in Europe, very much by hard security and investments in security and defense. About a month ago, the United Nations Sustainable Development Summit was held in Qatar, where attention was sought to shift to the Sustainable Development Goals. Both European countries, Gulf countries, and African countries actually were very active there. And there is also a third factor related to sustainable development, and that is, of course, investment, what the previous panel discussion was about. Both Gulf and European countries, as well as African countries, are willing to invest. There is a huge need for invest, whether it is in energy, education, digitalization, transport, or healthcare. What could be the role of the European Union in increasing cooperation between Africa and the Gulf region? I think a big opportunity is the Global Gateway strategy, which I referred to earlier. In this strategy, Europe set a goal of mobilizing 150 billion euros investments in Africa during the years 2022 till 2027. And the goal will be achieved. We are well on track. The idea of this strategy is to use public development cooperation funding, so ODA funding, to mobilize private investments in order to reduce risk, for example, through blended financing or guarantees. So the European Union is working with the development banks, development finance institutions, in order to encourage private companies from Europe, but also elsewhere, to invest in Africa. And I believe that actually there would be also a lot of opportunity for triangular cooperation with the Gulf region. The idea is that investments will follow high quality standards, and through these investments, new jobs will be created, and Africa's economic ecosystem and industrialization will also be strengthened. We know that Africa offers a large market and a lot of demand, but also critical raw materials. Europe offers technological expertise for cooperation and investments in human capital, including education. And the countries of the Gulf region, on the other hand, have economic resources and energy resources. I just give you two very simple examples of the Global Gateway initiatives in Africa. The first one is MA+, where the idea is really to start vaccine and medicine production in Africa. Africa still imports 99% of the vaccine it uses, 94% of the medicine it uses. So Africa is completely dependent on import when it comes to vaccines and medicines. And that's why we started this over 1 billion euro investment in vaccine and medicine production in Rwanda, in South Africa, in Senegal, with European companies bringing the technology and expertise, with funding from the development banks, but also working very closely with those governments and local authorities. The second example is Lobito Corridor. You may know the big initiative connecting Angola to DRC to Zambia, not only investing in transport infrastructure, but also promoting trade connections as well as economic ecosystem in that region. So the idea is really to create more jobs, create more economic growth. Ladies and gentlemen, the other big opportunity for Africa and for the cooperation is the African Free Trade Area, the preparation of which is underway and which the EU has supported and shared its expertise and experience. We all know that the European Union would not be what it is today without its internal market and free movement. So removing trade barriers is a huge opportunity within Africa, but also externally. And I think that this cooperation is also an opportunity for the Gulf region. As Commissioner, I also spoke with companies in each of the 27 EU member states, and I tried to understand how we could get European companies to invest more in Africa. And very often, actually, the answer was to train a skilled workforce and reduce political risk. It was not about access to funding. It was mainly about, if we invest, can you guarantee that there are educated and trained and skilled workforce? What about the political risk? What about if the country will change the legislation, and increase taxes, even though they have promised not to do that? So, where skilled workforce, political risk, those were the main topics which were raised by the companies in Europe. So, in my opinion, there is also need for investments in human capital and education. We know that 65% of the citizens in Africa are young people. We need also invest in them. We need to be able to invest in education, vocational education and training, and also teacher training. So this team is also important here in the Gulf, especially in Qatar. And actually I checked that the national strategies of all GCC countries praise the importance of investing in human capital. And this is, of course, also the case for many European countries. So I see that this is also an area where there are a lot of opportunities for cooperation. When it comes to political risk, I think that political risk is reduced by respect, of course, for the rule of law, but also increasing transparency and predictability. And these issues impact directly also to the business environment. So, ladies and gentlemen, my messages on Europe-Gulf cooperation for our joint partnership with Africa, I would summarize my messages with 3 C's: cooperative, rule-based world, co-investments through global gateway strategy, and complementary of linking infrastructure and energy projects by Gulf to industrial development and skills creation by the European Union. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to address you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Urpilainen, for these valuable insights and for reminding us of the wider global context shaping Africa-Gulf cooperation.